Hey there, Internet. With me is Jake the Unbreakable,
And with me is Niall, champion of Morr.
and you're watching the Readiness Report. So today we're once again coming to you from our secret bunker. And today we're going over a new release from GW, Nagash, Supreme Lord of the Undead. And this is the box that he comes in, and looks pretty cool, and there's the model. Before we go much further, I would like to point out, he's almost as tall as his box, and the picture on here, that's to scale. So if you go to your friendly local game store or a GW store, Battle Bunker, whatever you have near you, and look at the box art, that's to scale, to give you an idea of just how big this really is. It's a huge model.
All right, so here we have the new Nagash. It is quite the impressive
It's a
figure.
huge figure.
We have the old Nagash.
Less impressive.
Less impressive. And then we have a skeleton warrior for scale. So this new figure, it is, like I said, very impressive. It's huge. He's almost twice as large as the original. Mind you, he's floating and he's still almost twice as large.
Ignoring the fact that he's floating, just the guy from head to toe is almost twice as large as his original figure.
Yeah.
Which I would like to point out, people bag on that original figure. I don't know why. It's not the best figure GW ever made.
Definitely not.
But you also have to understand when it was made. Back then, a lot of their figures looked really silly. They did. I think the biggest problem, though, with Nagash was the paint job they had him in originally.
Wasn't he in purple?
Yeah. So, he, like I said, not the most hideous figure GW made, but definitely not spectacular looking.
The new one, much better.
Fantastic looking figure.
Massive attention to detail.
Yeah.
You always hear about the 9 books of Nagash.
Yeah.
You can count them. They're here.
Yeah, all
including
9 books.
One in his hand.
Right. And in his right hand, there's an option where instead of the book, he has a spirit being summoned. And if you choose to do that, there's a bit for that book to be on his hip. So he still has all 9 books.
Mm-hmm.
Which you can see on the original figure, he does not have 9 books. He does have one book on his hip.
Yeah. Another option that you told me about was the sword.
Yep.
So this one, we have the sword.
Yes. This one has the sword on it. If you choose to have the staff in his left hand instead, there is a bit to have the sword in the scabbard, so he can still have both. Unfortunately, there's not a way to have the staff on him when he's holding the sword out. It would be cool if there was some way to do it. He had it, on his back, or one of the ghosts carrying it, I think would have been really cool.
Speaking of ghosts, I really like those.
Oh, yeah. The way his cloak flows into the spirits is just really well done.
Yeah.
Just all around an impressive model. Very pleased. There's nothing about this figure that I don't like except for the spine backpack that was left off of this particular build, which is apparently optional too, because the area underneath said spine backpack is fully modeled armor. It's not like there's a hole there where something is clearly meant to go. Yeah, the figure, they just did an excellent job on the figure all around.
Yeah, he got much larger. So this guy, we put it out, he's 8 times the size, the base width.
Yeah, the area that the base takes up is about 8 times as much.
Whew.
So the stat line for Nagash is translated straight across from what it used to be. It's 7s and 6s across the board with a 10 leadership, which is obscene. It's really just out there. I don't know of anything that can stand up to it. Maybe like a Great Unclean One or a Bloodletter or something would stand a chance.
Or Dragon.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. But at any rate, he also comes equipped with a whole bunch of cool stuff. He has, first off, he has his sword, which gives him +1 strength, so he's swinging at you with strength 8. And multiple wounds D3 special rules. So with his 6 attacks, that's potentially 18 wounds in a single combat. That's
sick.
I mean, that's almost comical, really. In addition to that, he has the staff, which originally could hold Winds of Magic cards. We don't have the Winds of Magic mechanics anymore.
No, we don't.
But what we have now are power dice, and he can store up to 4 power dice in his staff. He can save them for later, and if he chooses to use them on a spell later, they don't count towards his maximum allowance of 6 power dice in a single spell. So he can roll 10 power dice if he spent all 4 at once.
At wizard level 5.
At wizard level 5. So in addition to that, he can also use the power dice in combat to give himself heroic killing blow for every attack he uses those on. So he's potentially just a complete beast in combat. He has the black armor still, which originally was a 4+ save that couldn't be modified because they didn't have ward saves back then. Now it's a 4+ save and a 4+ ward save. And he has the 9 books of Nagash. And what that does is he knows 9 spells. The first of which is always Rise the Grave Call from Lore of Undeath. Now he can get these spells from 5 different lores. There's Lore of Undeath, Lore of Nehekara, Lore of the Vampires, Lore of Light, and Lore of Death. And the way it works is he declares how many spells from each lore he's going to know before he generates the spells. So he knows the 1 right off the bat from Lore of Undeath. So that leaves 8 for him. So he can go, I'm going to know all 6 spells from Lore of Undeath.
Which I would do.
Right. And 2 from Lore of Light, or 1 from Lore of Light, 1 from Lore of Death, 1 from Lore of Vampires, 1 from Nehekara, and the remainder in Lore of Undeath. It's just he still has to roll for each of those spells when they're generated like normal. But he can declare how many of each he's going to use. I'm perfectly pleased with this. I love the Vampire Count's army. I love the Undead army, the Undead fluff and stuff. And as a result, my brother and I, who is the one who put this one together, actually, we've discussed, if they ever brought Nagash back into the game, what we would want from it, kind of like a nerdy fantasy football thing. And he's pretty much everything we wanted. All of his war gear is there. His stat line is appropriate. He's a huge, impressive model, and he's just really powerful.
And he spawns a lot.
Yeah, he can show up by himself and summon an army. There's nothing about this release that left me disappointed in the figure or the stats in any way.
So how can you find all these great rules? You can find them in White Dwarf Weekly issue 30.
Right.
You can also find them in this cool slipcase, Warhammer Nagash. Now this is a 2-book slipcase.
Yeah. Book 1 of this set is just all story. It's, talking about Nagash's story from, when he started out in ancient Khemri, and he was a priest in the mortuary cult. His rise to power, his death, his rise to power, his death, and his rise to power again.
There's the story of his lieutenants in here.
Yeah, the story of what's going on in the world as far as all the chaos brouhaha raging in the north, and the civil war going on in Bretonia, as well as the situation in Sylvania, which isn't looking that great either until Nagash comes back.
So chaos all around.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of stuff happening. We're not going to go too much into the story in this video, but it's really well done, and this lays out everything: why Nagash is back, how Nagash came to be back.
Yeah.
Book 2 is essentially the Undead Legion's army book. It's laid out basically like you would expect from an army book. It's essentially an Undead Legion's army book, or army is Tomb King's army book and the Vampire Count's army book smashed together, plus Nagash, plus new stats for Neferata, new stats for Manfred von Karstein, new stats for Vlad von Karstein, new stats for Krell, new stats for Archon the Black, as well as new stats for Valden and Krom the Conqueror, which are not part of the Undead Legion's army book, but their new stats are necessary for some of the scenarios that are also in the book.
Yeah, quite a few of those.
Yes.
That's like
there's
3/4 of this book?
Right. Well, there's scenarios that follow the campaign of Nagash's rise and coming back. And so each battle scenario is a different major battle that happens as part of the story of this whole Nagash Return.
Yeah, definitely a cool expansion for that.
Right. It's really cool the way they did it. Another thing about the Undead Legions, though, is when fielding an Undead Legion's army, they've changed the army composition rules. So it's up to 50% Lords, which means you can field Nagash in a 2,000 point army because he is a 1,000 point model. Up to 50% Heroes, and Core, Special, and Rare remain at their same. But yeah, the books they just did an amazing job on. The new artwork is amazing. The
Quite
binding,
impressive.
yeah, the new artwork is really impressive. The binding is well done.
This is his spawning. This
Yeah,
is them
that's
resurrecting
him.
them
That's him
again.
coming back. The new artwork is really well done. The way the book is laid out is really well done. The writing quality, the binding, it's just all around worth it, in my opinion. They just did an amazing job on it.
Yeah.
So with this new release, there's also a few new models. They've released a kit that's the Mordarks of Nagash, and it's his lieutenants. It's Manfred von Karstein, Archon the Black, and Neferata. They come mounted on an Abyssal Terror, which is pretty cool because there's never been a model for it before.
Yeah, previously it was just absent.
Frankly, what they did before was kind of lazy, in my opinion. What it was is it's a random monster pulled from the warp and bound to the will of the caster. So it can literally be anything was the excuse. So do your own thing. And I always felt that was really lazy. And it was kind of weird in the Vampire Count's Army book because on the page that has all the mounts you can put your heroes on, it has skeletal steeds and winged nightmares and zombie dragons, and it has pictures of all of them. It has really cool stylized artwork that goes with all of them. And there's nothing for the Abyssal Terror. So now we finally know what they look like. They're pretty huge and impressive and imposing. And in addition to that, they also introduced a new unit type, the Morghasts. They're monstrous infantry, and they're pretty powerful. Fluff-wise, what they are is, while Nagash was doing all his stuff on his Black Pyramid, the sun god of Khemri, Petra, or however you pronounce her name, sent forth these angels to go kill Nagash because Nagash is really evil. Nagash won that fight, and he resurrected them bound to his will. So essentially, they're undead angels.
Really cool fluff.
Which is pretty cool. At first, when they first showed them, they had no explanation for them and didn't really like them. I thought they were just, I thought they were getting carried away with all of the bone molding and stuff like that. But now that I know what they are, I think they're actually really cool.
Very.
In addition to that, there's new Spirit Host models, which, thank goodness, because out of everything in the Citadel Miniatures line, I think the Spirit Hosts were in most need for a redo. I mean, they looked like kids wearing sheets on their heads at Halloween. They were pretty awful.
Pretty bad.
But the new ones are really cool. They tie into the theme. They tie into the Nagash model. They look like the ghosts that are swirling around Nagash. They look like the ghosts that are carrying the Morghast. And so it ties everything together, and it's much more thematic and much style across the army.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just overall it looks a lot better, a lot more cohesive. All right, so with the release of Nagash comes a new magic lore, the lore of Undeath. So I'm going to go over the new lore, and real quick, going to go over what the spells are. I'm going to be using the battle magic cards for Lore of Undeath, because I have not memorized all the spells, so I'm going to cheat.
Neither have I.
So the signature spell for the lore is called Rise, the Grave Call. Range 12, casted on 9+. What it is the summoning spell that you can summon up to 50 points worth of infantry, but if you want to increase the difficulty to 14+ to cast, then you can get 100 points of infantry. Or you can, for 16+ cast cost, you can summon 150 points of monstrous infantry. Spell number 1 is called Morkarn, Breath of Darkness. This is an augment spell, range 12, cast on 6+. Immediately regain up to D3+1 wounds worth of models as described in Resurrecting Fallen Warriors. In addition, unless the unit is engaged in combat, it can also make a normal move as if it were the remaining move subphase. So
it's like a mix of...
Yeah, it's like a combination of Van Hels's Dance Macabre and Invocation from the Heck from the vampire lore.
Yeah.
Pretty cool augment spell. Those two individually have caused some havoc to me in the past. Spell number 2 is Kim, the Hand of Dust. I might have pronounced that right. It's an augment spell. The wizard casts it on himself. What it does is in close combat, the caster can choose to change all of his attacks for one Hand of Dust attack against one enemy model in base contact with him or his mount. If the roll to hit is successful, the target suffers a wound with multiple wounds D6 special rule, and no armor saves allowed. Hand of Dust attack. If the Hand of Dust attack slays an enemy character in a challenge, you immediately gain D6 raised dead counters. And we'll go over what raised dead counters are in a minute.
That sounds pretty good. Not on Nagash per se, but one of his.
Yeah, not necessarily on Nagash because he's so powerful in combat already. He gets so many attacks. I don't know if I'd want to exchange all of them for one Hand of Dust attack.
Maybe one of his lieutenants.
Yeah, that could be pretty cool. Alright, spell number 3. Kizar, the Soul Stealer. It's a direct damage spell, range 12, cast on an 8+. 2d6 plus, you roll a 2d6 plus 2. For each point, the result exceeds the target's leadership. The target suffers 1 wound with no armor saves allowed. If the spell causes at least 1 unsaved wound, you immediately gain additional D3 raised dead counters.
So a lot of raised dead counters.
Yeah.
Seems to be.
Spell number 4. Razkar, the Abyssal Swarm.
That's a pretty cool name.
Yeah,
like...
these spells also have some pretty cool descriptions as well. For this one, for instance, is the wizard binds the bones of predatory creatures with dark magic, causing them to rise from their animal graves. So, kind of like Pet Cemetery.
Or Frankenwing.
What this one does is it's a summoning spell. So back into summoning spells, which is really what the lore strength is just summoning an extra army, basically. Yeah. So what it does is it's a summoning spell, range 12, cast on a 10+. The caster summons a single unit of war beasts or swarms, worth up to 75 points from the Undead Legion's army list. And the wizard can instead choose to summon a single unit of monstrous beasts, worth up to 150 points, for a 16+ casting cost.
Ooh, could be tough.
Yeah, it could. Spell number 5 is Kandorak, the Harbinger. It's another summoning spell, range 12, cast on a 10+. The caster summons a single character, worth up to 65 points, selected from the Undead Legion's army list. And the caster can instead choose to summon a monster, chariot, or war machine, worth up to 200 points, for a casting cost of 24.
That's kind of high.
Yeah, but I mean, think about it. You could get yourself like a Varkle for something, and then it could be, really devastating. And spell number 6, Akar Aran, the Dark Riders. I had to slow down to say that one.
It's another speak their language.
Yeah, it's another summoning spell. Range 12, cast on a 16+. Summon a single unit of cavalry, monstrous cavalry, or chariots worth up to 150 points. Selected from the Undead Legion's army book, like all the others.
So a lot of these spells, Nagash really benefits from.
Yeah. So one of the real strengths of Nagash when using these spells is when he's using a summoning spell from the Lore of Undeath, he gets ×3 the points values. And ×3 the range for casting summoning spells. So,
and the counters.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. And so, I mean, think about that. He could come onto the battle and go, you know what? I really think that I want a unit of Blood Knights on your flank, and summon a unit of Blood Knights on your flank, because you can spend these points however they could normally be spent. So you can get yourself a champion, a standard bearer, and a musician out of it. If they can take magical banners in the unit, they can get the magical banner. So it can be pretty powerful.
Bring your own army.
Yeah, bring an extra army. And the one where you can summon characters, there's nothing stopping him from summoning Krell, Conrad von Karstein. It can be pretty devastating.
Krell would hurt.
Well, Krell would hurt if he started out on the battlefield, not just summoned. All right, but real quick, we'll go over what a summoning spell is. So it's a type of spell enables the caster to place a new unit under the owning player's command onto the battlefield. It'll specify what type of unit to be summoned. Da-da-da. So some rules real quick on it is the summon unit has to be at least 1 inch away from any existing unit. The entirety of the unit has to be within range of the caster. So if you summon a block of 20 skeletons, the entire unit has to be within 12 inches of the caster. And yeah, and if the unit's 5 or more, they have to be at least a 5 wide unit. And obviously they can't be placed on impassable terrain, things like that. All right, so what Jake was talking about, or mentioned earlier about the raised dead counters. That's part of the lore attribute for the lore of Undeath. And what that says is that place a raised dead counter on the battlefield for each time a friendly wizard successfully casts a spell from the lore of Undeath. Any friendly wizard that subsequently casts a summoning spell from the lore of Undeath can choose to expend one or more of the counters after they have successfully cast their spell. And for each counter they spend, they increase the points worth of models they can get by 10. So Nagash multiplies by 3, including the counters. So if for each counter Nagash spends, he gets another 30 points. For every counter Archon the Black spends, he gets another 20 points. So yeah, Nagash gets triple points after you take into account the raised dead counters, and Archon gets double points after you take into account raised dead counters. So
quite the spawning.
Yeah, I mean, Nagash shows up. You cast a couple spells with your other casters, and then just stuff starts coming up. So it's potentially really, really devastating. It just really tips the balance of the battle. And but the cool thing about the lore of Undeath is not just Nagash gets this. So whenever you're playing one of the scenarios out of the lore of the Warhammer Nagash book, every wizard in the game gets the lore of Undeath. So my Celestial Battle Wizard for my Empire army, playing out of the scenario book, can have the lore of Undeath card. He can start summoning skeletons of his own if he wants to. And that obviously includes necromancers and vampires if you're playing vampire counts with your Nagash, as well as anything. Although I'm pretty sure the dwarves don't get any benefit from that.
No, we don't.
But just die. And the reasoning for that in the fluff is that when Nagash is summoned back into the world, it releases a huge wave of dark energy into the world, and the world is just saturated and soaked with all this evil energy, so all the wizards can just dabble in necromancy.
You get a sense for how evil this guy is.
Right. Yeah, so that's the lore of Undeath. Really cool spells, all about summoning. I mean, there's a couple of cool spells in there otherwise, but really it's about bringing more models onto the battlefield. I think the real problem is going to be running out of figures to actually, like physical models to put on the table, I think is going to be the limiting factor here.
Yeah.
So something interesting that we've discussed is we think you might be able to use this new lore of Undeath to summon a zombie dragon. So here's the argument for it. So, using spell number 5 of the lore of Undeath, Kandarak the Harbinger. It says you can summon a single monster, chariot, or war machine worth up to 200 points on a casting cost of 24. Now, Nagash multiplies that by 3. It'll give him 600 points to spend on that. So,
dragon being over 500 points.
Well, a vampire lord with a zombie dragon mount is over 500 points.
Yeah.
So, the way the Warhammer rules read is that a character on a monster has both the unit type of the rider and the monster. So a vampire lord on a zombie dragon is both a vampire and a monster.
Yeah, okay.
Which would fall under the single monster worth up to, in this case, 600 points for Nagash. However, there's also an argument against it. And that being that the way the summoning rules read is that you summon a unit and they can take any of their add-ons. The zombie dragon is an add-on for the vampire lord. So, the argument could be made since you're summoning the vampire lord who is not a monster and taking the add-on of the zombie dragon. then that wouldn't apply. I mean, personally, I'd allow it if I were fighting against him because I'm probably going to lose the game anyway. To be perfectly honest.
Might as well have fun with it.
Yeah.
See if we can stop the zombie dragon.
I have plenty of cannons. It'll be okay. But I think that about does it for this episode of Readiness Report. Next time, we'll be doing a battle against Nagash. It'll be the Sylvanian State Army commanded by myself and Jacob, versus the Undead Legion, commanded by my brother, who owns the Nagash here, as well as the Undead Legion we'll be fighting against. I'm not very confident about this battle because Nagash is involved, which means no plans are going to work.
We're going to lose.
But
we're going to become members of his legion.
Yeah, it's not going to go well. But I hope you like this video. Be sure to check out our Facebook page.
Also, follow us on Twitter at Shop of Magic.
And if you want to make sure you check out that Nagash battle report later on, just go ahead and click that subscribe button. It's right down there. Just click on that. That way you'll be sure to know when that video comes out. Grasping hold of his foe, the wizard pours forth the decaying power of the ages, desecrating flesh, armor, and bone, and reducing his victim to dust in a single heartbeat. The wizard tears the souls of his victims' bodies before breathing unlife into their sundered corpses. Nagash is back. Nothing has to make sense anymore.